So here in Photoshop, we're going to have a look at how we create this type of design in Photoshop using images and layer masks and also some hue saturation adjustment layers. So the original image that we're starting from is basically this photo of a snowboarder, and then we're going to mask this out, create some transparent areas to that image, and then also use that same image to kind of turn it into a brush to create this kind of fun effect that we can see here. This is going to include a lot of very cool Photoshop techniques for creating brushes, for working with transparency and layers, and also for creating custom brushes that kind of create this type of scatter effect. So we're going to go to File and Open first of all and jump into our original snowboarder JPEG. And basically, once we've got this image up, the first thing we're going to do is make a duplicate of this background layer. So this is just in case we ever need to go back to the original, then we don't have to kind of open it up, or if we delete the original JPEG, then we still have a copy in our Photoshop document. So we can do this in a couple of ways. We can right click on the layer and go to Duplicate Layer, and we'll just click OK, or we can drag down our layer to the New Layers button down here, and that will also create a duplicate of that layer as well. So now that we've got this layer up, I want to create our kind of background color layer. So I'm going to come to my background and just create a new blank layer, and it's this layer that I'm going to fill kind of with the background color that you can see in my design here, so this orange that we have. So we're going to use Shift and F5 to fill it with color, and we're going to select as the contents a color, and then in here we can just kind of move around and select the color we want. We'll go for this orange and click OK, and then click OK, and basically now we have a layer of color behind this snowboarder. So when we make the transparency, we'll be able to kind of clearly see what we have. So I'm going to zoom in here. I'm going to use Command and plus to zoom in, or Control and plus if you're on the PC. And basically, now I want to use the quick selection tool on this layer to make a selection of this snowboarder. So the first thing I need to do is just make sure I'm on the right layer. So I don't want to be on my layer 1 orange layer, I want to be on the background copy. And we'll come across to our tools on the left hand side here, and we're going to grab this quick selection tool. So wherever you see the little white arrow next to the tools, basically you have extra tools there. So if you don't see the quick selection tool, it may be because you're on the Magic Wand tool, but just click and hold and grab the quick selection tool. And this tool allows you to basically drag along an area of your image and it will select it. So if I drag here, you can see it's detecting the image that I'm dragging along and basically making a selection of that. If your brush is too big, then you can come up to the tools here and modify the size. And we can also add a bit of feather to our brush as well. And we will dive in and kind of get some of the snowboard here. So we'll drag along the snowboard, and you can see it doing a reasonable selection because we've got this nice contrast between the foreground and background image. I'm also going to subtract some of these areas inside here. So if I hold down the Alt key or Option key on my keyboard, I can click in here just once and once here, and basically it's going to subtract those lighter areas of the image. So if I zoom right in here, so Control or Command and plus, I'm just going to have a look around the edge. Everything looks pretty good. I might add in a couple of bits here, and I can just kind of click to add in because I have my quick selection on the plus option here. So if I make a mistake, such as this, then I can go to the minus option and subtract that area, or I can hold down the Alt key and subtract any kind of errors that I make as I go around the edge. So that looks pretty good for what we need. So now that we've got that selected, I've just used Command and 0 or Control and 0 to kind of zoom back to fit the screen. And now I'm going to go to my Layers panel across on the bottom right, and I'm going to select this Layer Mask option. So basically now you can see I've got my snowboarder. Come back to my Move tool, and I can move him around and position him, and we're kind of ready to go with the next step of this. So what I'm going to do here is actually flip this horizontally because I want the pattern to be moving across to the right. So I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, and use the Flip Horizontal option. We'll just kind of flip my snowboarder to the other direction. And then I'm actually going to make a duplicate of this layer. So I'm going to right click again and come up to the top, make a duplicate of that layer, and then we'll click OK. So now that we have this duplicate layer, I'm just going to hide that other layer in the background. I'm just saving that in case I make any mistakes, so I can go back to that layer mask and don't have to redo the work with the quick selection tool. So now in here, I want to delete the layer mask. Okay, I'm going to drag that down to the trash can. And when it says apply layer mask before removing, it just means that it's going to apply that transparency to the layer. So we want to do that. So now basically you can see we've lost that little black and white image that's creating the transparency, and we just have the snow border on their own, which is what we want. So now I'm going to make a couple of duplicates of this layer. So basically if I right click, I can come up to duplicate layer, or even if I select a couple of layers, I can drag them down to the new layers button here, and it will duplicate 2 at a time. So I'm going to grab these 3 topmost layers and just gradually transform them up. So I'm going to go to edit and free transform, and I'm going to scale this one up, and basically I'm kind of making across on the right here an area that we can blend into the image when we kind of use the brush. So we're basically adding in some extra image, and you'll see how that works when we finish this up. So I'm going to go up to the next layer. I'm going to use Command or Control and T to bring up the free transform, so basically the same option. And we just want to scale this right up. We want lots of texture in the background, and I'm not too worried about this being a bit pixelated. It's going to kind of work for what we're doing here. And then I'll grab this last one. So we're leaving one original image in here, and I'm going to do Control or Command and T to transform this one up, and we'll just increase the size as big as we can. So I'm going to zoom out so we can, so Command or Control and minus, so we can really kind of see those edges there. And I'll rotate this. I kind of want to fill this area around the back of that snowboarder. So we'll hit enter there. And then these 3 topmost layers here, so I've got my original layer in the background there, and I've got these 3 layers. I'm gonna select one of those and then hold down Shift to select all 3. I'm going to blend them together. So we're going to go to Merge Layers down here, or Control or Command and E, and that will merge those layers together. And now we can hide them for a second while we go into making the brush. So for the brush here, we're going to go to File and New. I'm going to make a new blank document. And my document size doesn't matter too much, but I'm going to make it 1024 by 1024 here. That should be fine. It's a pretty big brush if we make it. And you can see now at the top I've got these kind of 2 tabs here. So if I come to my snowboarder, I can actually click and hold on this layer, and as long as I'm moving him, I can drag it up and then drag back down to the middle of my next document, and there we have our snowboarder here. So I'm going to transform this down a little bit. So again, Command or Control and T, because we don't want a super huge brush. It will kind of slow down the kind of use of the brush as well. So somewhere around here will be good. Now when we make brushes in Photoshop, it basically makes them from the light and dark areas of the image. So with our snowboarder layers selected here, if we go to Edit and Define Brush Preset, you can basically see it's grabbing that snowboarder, and I'll call this snowboarder brush. Hit OK. And now you can see I've got a stamp here, and I can basically stamp there with my brush. Now I've got my opacity for my brush set down to 30% up here, so I'm going to drag that back up to 100, and you can see now when I click, we've got this much darker version of that snowboarder. So that's kind of good for what we need. We can actually close this document without saving it, and we'll come to our snowboarder image here. And basically, this is where things get kind of interesting. So I'm going to do Command or Control and 0 to zoom to fit, and I'm going to select my topmost layer where we've just kind of got this mess of these big snowboarders here. And what we want to do is we're going to add a layer mask here to that layer. Okay, and my layer mask is white at the moment, which means that everything on that layer is visible, so we can see everything that we have. If I do Command and or Control and I, it's going to invert that layer. So basically now the layer mask is black. I still have everything in that layer. If I hold down Shift and click there, you can see it's all still there. And if I grab my brush, I can paint on this layer, and I want to paint on the left here with white. So I'm going to flip to my default colors here, white in the foreground and black in the background. And now you can see when I click here, it actually grabs little bits of that image in the background and allows me to paint them in. This is not very exciting at the moment. Basically, what we're seeing is just the snowboarder kind of moving in the same direction, and we want to add a bit of dynamism to that. So I'm going to do Command or Control and Z, or Edit Undo a few times to step back through my settings here. So now what I want to do is bring up my brush options, and you can see in my brush options I have some shape dynamics which I want turned on. So I'm going to increase some size jitter and make sure I'm painting on the layer mask here. And now when I paint on, you can see every time I paint with my brush it's a slightly different size. So I'm going to undo those, so Control or Command and Z. And then I'm going to turn on my angle jitter, which is going to rotate those brushes. So now you can see, increase my size jitter. You can see that when I paint, I'm basically getting, just going to hide this for a second, a different brush size every time I paint with that brush. So if we undo those last steps, I'm just going to start with a slightly smaller brush. Okay, and you can see now we're starting to get that scatter effect, and I'm using the shortcuts on my keyboard, the square brackets, to kind of increase and decrease the size of my brush. And you can see I can just gradually fill this space up with different kind of parts of the original image, sort of as a texture in the background. So the next step we get here is we're going to add a layer mask to our snowboarder here, so to background copy 2. So now what I can do is with my black brush, I'm going to come down here and use this little hooked arrow to flip them round. I can basically cut out bits of the original snowboarder down here as well by using these brushes too. And this is where it sort of gets interesting, where we can move between these two layers, flipping the black and white, and start to make it look like that snowboarder is exploding sort of out of the back here and adding a bit of dynamism to that image. And we're just filling up the area here. And you'll notice I'm not dragging with my brush, and we'll just get a big blob of brush, which isn't always helpful. But we can now just kind of jump in here and gradually work in the different textures, making sure we're painting on our mask layers as we paint here. And I'm using X to flip between black and white. You can see X will flip those options. So on my mask layer at the top to hide things or show things, and then also to hide things as well. So if I flip here, I can also kind of cut into some of these snowboarders too to add a bit more texture and a bit more interest. But you can see we get this kind of full texture of that snowboarder in there, mixed in with the color that was originally in that image, which produced this nice kind of effect. So the last thing we'll do here to finish this off is basically we're going to add a hue and saturation adjustment layer from our adjustment layers down here. And basically what that's going to allow us to do is to actually twist the color of this image. So I can basically change the color of the image. And what I can do is if I right click on this layer and go to create clipping mask, I can just apply that to the scatter layer. So you can see here, as I'm increasing the saturation and kind of changing this, we're just changing the parts of the image on the scatter layer. Now if we blend this with one other layer, a levels adjustment layer, here we can kind of control the color in that image, or the kind of amount of color in that image, by pulling in the blacks and whites here. So if I now come to my layer mask here, the hue saturation adjustment layer, I'm going to turn on colorize, and you can see now we can basically color all those different snowboarders. So I want to move from full color on this layer to kind of a single color. So basically I'm going to get this to the point where I'm happy with this sort of saturation and the brightness of that. We'll go for this magenta, and in this instance I'm going to come to my layer mask and I'm going to go to my brushes here, and I want to save this brush preset. So we'll call this snowboarder version 2. I already made one earlier. So I've got this snowboarder, I've got another snowboarder brush here, and I want to go back to my normal brushes. I'm going to scroll all the way back up to the top here, and I'm looking for this soft round brush. So just like with the layer mask for making transparency, we can use the layer mask on our hue saturation adjustment layer to basically hide some of that adjustment. So if I go to black here in my colors and increase the size of my brush, and I'm using the right square bracket to the right of the P key here to increase the size of that brush. And if I right click, I want to make sure the hardness here is down, and now I can basically blend that from the color in that layer to the pink in that layer. So you can see we get this nice blend, and we can kind of modify and work with how we're blending that and how much detail we've got in that image between this and the levels adjustment layer. So I can also use the same masking technique on the levels adjustment layer, so we have more detail close to here, and then as we move to the color layer, we get that full kind of impact of the levels adjustment layer and the kind of squashing of the blacks and whites there. We could also add one extra layer in here just to kind of complete this effect and kind of make things a bit more interesting. I'm going to go back to my layer 1, and then I'm going to go to File and Place Embedded. I'm going to come to this image of a mountain that I have, and that's going to kind of drop in behind this layer. So what I want to do, I've gone to my move tool, is I'm going to move my layer to the left here, and I'm going to use Command or Control and T to transform this, and I just want to position this mountain so basically we're going to mask out the blue here. So I'm going to bring this back to the middle a little bit and hide my other layers. So I'm holding down the Alt key to hide my other layers. I'm now going to grab my quick selection tool and then move across the blue of the sky, because it's easier to select than the more detailed mountain here. So where we have a kind of clear color, that would be the things to select. And then we can go to Select and Inverse. And now that we've inverted our selection, we can go to our Layers panel and click the Add Layer Mask button to create a transparency for this layer. And if I hold down the Alt key, I can bring back all those other layers that were turned on before. If I add a hue saturation adjustment layer above this one, desaturate that mountain, add a clipping mask, then that is going to give a pretty nice effect. So we've got our snowboarder kind of exploding to the right there. I've got a little bit of extra mountain here from the edge of that image. I can just paint that out, just the edge of that photo. And I could also add in here a levels adjustment layer just to kind of mute that image there, just to fade it a little bit, make it look a little bit more like it's in the background of this image. And we could also maybe just nudge it a little bit to the left here. So we have the mountain there and our snowboarder, and then this nice effect across the right. And I think I just want to use the crop tool as well, just to kind of bring this in a little bit. So we have those snowboarder graphics running all the way to the edge. Hit Enter to apply that, and Control or Command 0 to bring that to the front. And there we go. So that's the kind of end of this demonstration. You can see how we can use those brushes in a really creative way to kind of create transparency in our image. And I hope you found that useful. If you enjoyed this Photoshop tutorial, would like to check out some more, then look at my YouTube channel or my Skillshare channel. I'll leave links below. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you all on the next tutorial.